I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis, including all of the fantastic team at HEC Media. I especially thank them for their support on this event. What J.D. Vance did for Appalachia with Hillbilly Elegy, CNN analyst, and one of the youngest state representatives in South Carolina history, Bakari Sellers, does for the rural South in this important book that illuminates the lives of America's forgotten Black working class men and women. Part memoir, part historical and cultural analysis, My Vanishing Country is an eye-opening journey through the South's past, present, and future. Anchored in Bakari Sellers' hometown of Denmark, South Carolina, My Vanishing Country illuminates the pride and pain that continues to fertilize the soil of one of the poorest states in the nation. He traces his father's rise to become friend of Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King, a civil rights hero and member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to explore the plight of the South's dwindling rural Black working class, many of whom can trace their ancestry back 7 generations. In his poetic personal history, we are awakened to the crisis affecting the other forgotten men and women, whom the media seldom acknowledges. For Sellers, these are his family members, neighbors, and friends. He humanizes the struggles that shape their lives to gain access to healthcare as rural hospitals disappear, to make ends meet as the factories they have relied on shut down and move overseas, to hold on to precious traditions as their towns erode, to forge a path forward without succumbing to despair. My Vanishing Country is also a love letter to fatherhood, to Sellers' father, his lodestar, whose life lessons have shaped him, and to his newborn twins, who he hopes will embrace the Sellers family name and honor its legacy. Bakari Sellers made history in 2006 when, at just 22 years old, he defeated a 26-year incumbent, someone who had been in office longer than he had been alive, to become the youngest member of the South Carolina state legislature and the youngest African-American elected official in the nation. In 2014, he was the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor in the state of South Carolina. Sellers is a CNN political analyst and served in the South Carolina state legislature. Recently named to Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 list, he is also a practicing attorney who fights to give a voice to the voiceless. Tonight, Bakari will be in conversation with Pete Buttigieg. Pete has served as 2-term mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and was a Democratic candidate for the President of the United States in 2020. A graduate of Harvard University and an Oxford Rhodes Scholar, Buttigieg enlisted in the U.S. Navy Reserve and became a lieutenant when he was deployed to Afghanistan in 2014. In April 2019, he announced his candidacy for president, and in February 2020 won the Iowa caucuses, becoming the first openly gay person to ever win a presidential primary or caucus. He authored The Shortest Way Home in 2019. And now, I am very proud to welcome Bakari Sellers and Pete Buttigieg for Left Bank Books and HEC TV. If everyone at home would please give them a round of applause.
Thank you so much. Pete, you got me?
Yes, I can. Thanks. Great to be with you.
Thank you, Shane. From the bottom of my heart, as a young man from Denmark, South Carolina, where we had 3 stoplights and a blinking light, I just want to say thank you to Left Bank Books for welcoming me into your home with your friends and your customers and your board and your family. To Pete, we've known each other for a very long period of time, and I'm really, it warms my spirit how well you did running for president of the United States. We all knew you were extremely capable, but yet and still you shocked even our greatest expectations. And we expect so much more from you now. I guess that is somewhat of a double-edged sword, but I'm just thankful for your friendship. I'm thankful for your love, your kind words, and I'm thankful that you are spending an hour with me here today. It means a great deal to me.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's amazing to think all the ups and downs since I first met you, and things that have come to pass even just since the end of the presidential campaign, and it makes the conversations that we're having, I think, that much more timely. So great to be reunited, and great to see that your pandemic beard game is definitely the top percentile. So congratulations on that.
I'm channeling my inner Denzel Washington right now. If you see, I am rocking the Liz told me to make sure that I rock the Pete Buttigieg wear. So I got my collar shirt on and my sleeves are rolled up, so I'm ready to go.
There we go. I should have brought out the blue tie for you, but I figure all our dress codes are being adjusted. Well, I'm really excited to talk with you. I know we're going to go to a moderated Q&A later, but before we jump into the substance of the book, I'm curious. Having I've written exactly one book. It was a memoir as well. I'm just curious about your process and how you found it, since you're putting, frankly, a lot of personal as well as political observations onto the page out in the world. How's the reception been, and what have you learned?
So, for me, Peter, I have to tell you, I was starting this process and I didn't want to write a memoir. I was trying to write a political book, but no one wanted to buy it. I got turned down by 20 to 30 different publishers and opportunities. I wrote sample chapters. I did everything I thought that you could do to get a book opportunity. And finally, Tracy Sherrod set me down from HarperCollins, from the Amistad imprint of HarperCollins, set me down with Judah Kerr and Patrick Bass, and they said, "Tell me your story." And I just told them about the Orangeburg massacre and where I was coming from the poor rural South. I told them about losing Clemente Pinckney in the Charleston massacre, and I just put my heart on paper. How is the reception? I'm nervous. I'm anxious because, as you know, when you write your truth down, it gets you put everything you have onto the sheets of paper, and so I'm excited. And I'm really anxious, and hope people take it and read it with a sense of understanding. I had to write this book quicker than most. I wrote it over a 4 to 5 month period, and the reason being is because somebody that we both look up to. Somebody that I believe we both call a friend has a book coming out at the end of this year by the name of Barack Obama. And so my publisher said, whatever you do, you have to finish this book so we can get it out before then. But I was really excited about it. And I put everything I had into my Vanishing Country.
Great. Well, congratulations on bringing it out. It's a terrific read, and I think very timely. You mentioned even just now two tragedies that I think really, in many ways, are the two pillars of the story. And the first, the Orangeburg massacre, is something that you described as in many ways the most important day in your life. It happened before you were even born. I should say, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was not taught anything about the Orangeburg massacre growing up. I thought I knew the 60s, certainly learned about what had happened at Kent State and the killing of student protesters there. There was recently an anniversary acknowledging that, but it wasn't until much later that I learned about the massacre of students fighting to integrate a bowling alley on the campus of the historically black college, South Carolina State University. As one of the many haunting and memorable experiences that I was blessed to have in the presidential campaign. I had an opportunity to visit the site of the Orangeburg massacre with your father, Dr. Bakari Sellers, who was shot then, and who I imagine has walked that ground with so many, educating, as he did me, people, visitors, about what it was like, what happened, and what it meant. I wonder if you could share a little bit about, first of all, how you think we can do a better job as a country of understanding and even just acknowledging what happened, and then what it was like to grow up in the shadow of this event that was so defining for your father, would become so defining for you, even though it happened years before you were born.
So first, let me just say thank you for using your platform, being on the trail, seeking out my father, and exploring that bit of history that not many people know about. My father picked up the phone and he said, your friend Pete's campaign called me. They want me to come over to Orangeburg. I'm going to walk around with them and I'm going to talk to them about the massacre. I'm going to talk to them about 68, as he refers to it. I said, that's going to be a really good event. It warmed my spirit that you didn't have to do that, but you took that moment out to lift those voices up, lift those persons who had given so much in those two young men who died. I am still more angry, and I write about it, about February 8th, 1968, than even my father, because I see the toil. I see the fact that his eyes don't pop like they used to from shedding so many tears. I see that his shoulders don't stand as upright as they once did from carrying the burdens of a generation. I know that he was shot. I know that he was imprisoned. I talk about the injustice that was. But then I also talk about the trauma that extends from that through generations. And that's what I want people to kind of have some sense of understanding, that trauma that it just extends, because my sister was born while my father was in prison. My father had a felony for until 1990, till he was pardoned. Imagine being a black man in the South with a felony on your record. And so my family had undergone and gone through so much trauma that it's not just one generation that deals with it. It's more than one. And growing up in our household, we all knew there were two things. One, it was amazing growing up with a hero in your kitchen every day, right? That's just it's a truly blessed experience. That's first. Second, I grew up around so many people, the Stokely Carmichael, the Julian Bonds, the Kathleen Cleavers, the Marion Barrys, the Jesse Jacksons. And so I look at my politics, my life, the culture, everything through the lens of the civil rights movement. And I was grateful to them. And my father taught me one lesson in which he said that heroes walk among us. And he didn't want us to think that it was just about Martin, Malcolm, and Rosa, but he also wanted us to know about the other heroes and sheroes who gave so much.
So you grow up surrounded by these giants of the civil rights movement. I think you talk in many ways about the sense of responsibility that comes with that. Even so, it was an audacious thing to run for office at the age that you did. This is something one of many things that I know exactly. I'm a big fan of running before people say it's your turn. But I think one of the really defining dynamics in the book is this question of you doing things that are a little bit out of step for your age. On one hand, your family members described you as being kind of an old soul, being a little old for your age. On the other hand, because you're tall, right, you get to go to college. You're a Morehouse. People have no idea that you're 16 until a packet of balloons arrives.
Correct.
Innocently sent, I gather, by your mother, wishing you a happy 17th birthday. You run for office. I think you're 20 or 21, maybe 21 when you get sworn in. When you run statewide, as I did in my late 20s, with roughly equal results, I got my
exactly.
Got my head handed to me. Talk about that dynamic, and in particular, I wanted to run one other thing by you, which is maybe I certainly felt when I was running for mayor here in South Bend, the fact that I was very young actually helped me with voters. And really interesting and unexpected, it helped me with older voters the most. It's a fairly similar dynamic we found when I was running for president, that many of the voters most excited about a young candidate, precisely because of being young, were the older voters. I did not find that same enthusiasm, intergenerational enthusiasm, always existed among elected officials, though. So can you talk about not just how voters looked at you when you were still young, but what's it like walking into a place as, I assume, as intimidating as the legislature, as a legislator, taking your seat among people who've been there for a very long time? You're a young man, you're a young black man.
Yes.
What's it like, and how did you think about how to negotiate your age at each of these steps?
So, I mean, that's a good question. You're channeling your inner Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon here with these good questions. When I ran, I had this sense of, I could act, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? You know those questions very well. I had done everything really young. People are going to ask, how was I so young? Why was I so young? Well, I went to kindergarten for a semester. Then after Christmas, they put me in first grade. And then the next year, they put me in third grade. So I skipped 2 halves and a whole. And then there was some question about whether or not I was going to skip 9th grade. And I made the personal choice not to do it. I had been with the cohort, this group of friends, for a long period of time. So I chose not to. And so, yeah, I went to high school at 12, college at 16, got my law degree by 23. But one of the things I wanted to do, I had these co-curricular experiences while I was in college. One of the things I wanted to do was run for office. And I didn't think that you had to wait in line, just like you. I didn't think you had to wait in line to run for office. I didn't think I had to get approval from anyone to run for office. I talk about the fact that I called Thomas Rhode, who was my opponent at the time, to inform him I was going to run against him, and just let him know and have that courtesy. And we didn't speak at all until 2 days. He didn't even call me after the night I won. He didn't call me for a couple of days later. But yeah, when I walked into the Capitol, there was not only being young, and the cool part about being young, and I'm pretty sure you probably got this, when you knock on doors, you have this resolve that you're going to knock on every single door. I knocked on doors with Confederate flags. I knocked on doors with these big pit bulls, because I really wanted to meet people where they are. I had this firm belief that no matter white, black, Democrat, or Republican, that you wanted to have a grocery store in your community, that you didn't want your grandparents having to choose between whether or not they were going to pay their utility bills or get their pharmaceutical drugs. We went through. I went through these steps in my mind that I could literally change the lives of the people. I wasn't yet jaded by reality. I'm proud to say I'm still not really jaded by that reality. And then walking into the State House, there was a sense of pride because I was the agitator's son. I was walking into a State House where, it's the same state that put my family through so much trauma. And I was there to help change that, put a new face on that, tear down the systems of injustice from within. I don't know how successful I was at that, but I tried my damnedest. And so there was that sense of pride. And then there was this sense of being young that everybody looked at me because I was 21, 22 years old. And so I was the youngest by like a decade plus. And so everybody's staring at you when the first time you open your mouth, they're like, they want to see what you're all about. Who is this young dude, this young black guy from Denmark, who is the son of this civil rights hero? What does he have to say? And Pete, I don't think people really remember, but when I was elected, every day I went outside when I was having a rough day and took a deep breath. I did so under the auspices of the Confederate flag because it still flew proudly in front of our state capitol.
And as you mentioned in your book, it was put up in 1961, which also says something about why it was on the grounds of the state capitol, right? It's not something that they just forgot to put away from the 19th century.
Yeah, I remind people all the time that's not a flag from the Civil War. That is a flag that was put up to give a middle finger to the civil rights movement and nonviolent resistance and protest. And so, yeah, all of these emotions were going through my mind, all of these emotions going through my head. And every single day, it was such an amazing feeling because every single day I had a chance to help people and change lives. But it was being young, being black, being a Democrat, and being a young black Democrat in South Carolina. It was a hell of a job.
So let me take it one level deeper because there's another set of questions that I think are revolve, especially for young candidates, around the subject of ambition. So one of the things I appreciated about the candor of the book is you mentioned that at the age of 17, once you start, you're an intern in Washington, you're starting to think about public service, you can picture yourself running, and you and a friend are slicing and dicing data from a district. And so the reason that's on my mind is that this question of ambition, I think, cuts against American political culture a little bit. One thing I wrote in my book is that, you're not supposed to reveal that it's even dimly occurred to you that you might run for office until the day you make your announcement, right?
Correct.
And then you say, well, a lot of people came and told me I should run, and I didn't think I should, but eventually they wore me down. And for many people, that's truly their story. But you're expected to present your decision or your ambition to run that way, whether that's the story or not. And I'm thinking about, and I'm not even talking about the potential running mate selection. Leave that aside. But I'm thinking about Stacey Abrams, right, has been very transparent about the fact that she's not enough for the presidency. And I wonder about the expectations that have formed in our culture around whether you're supposed to admit that you have a level of aspiration or ambition or not. When anybody who's anywhere near being expected to run, certainly for president, has revealed themselves to be an ambitious person. It'd be weird not to be, right?
Correct.
And I'm wondering how that's different for men than it is for women, and I'm thinking about how it's different maybe for Black leaders than it is for white. How have you reflected
So
on the subject?
I think that what Stacey's going through is unlike anything that we've seen before, because being a Black female seeking that position of vice president, you can't go by normal rules. You can't simply do the things that everyone else has done throughout time. You have to position yourself and take advantage of your opportunities. And so I'm not mad at her for doing that. For me, there were people who looked at me like I had three heads, that I had just lost my mind. What was I thinking about? How would I challenge Thomas Rhode, who had not only been in the State House for 26 years, but who was the chair of the county council? Before he was chair of the county council, he delivered the mail. Before he delivered the mail, he delivered the milk. He knew everyone. And then there were people in line to take his place. And so what was I doing? How did I have the audacity to skip over them? But what warms my spirit is that even when I was running for office, I remind people all the time, I got elected in 2006. What year did you get elected for mayor?
You were an elected official long before I was. 2011 was my first successful election.
So I was elected in 2006, and back then Barack Obama was just, and I don't want to sound condescending at all, because I love 44, but he was just someone who had given an amazing speech in 2004 and was a United States senator. See, the person that we looked up to in terms of young Black elected officials was Deval Patrick, because Deval Patrick had reached that plateau, had reached that mountaintop. And so, I recall this, having this really, I guess people thought it to be somewhat unconscionable belief in self. But you're right. When I was knocking on doors, letting people know that I wanted to serve them, I was getting, lemonade. I was getting the tea. I was getting invited in to see if I could date their daughter. I mean, there was a wide array.
You never know when you knock on that door.
You never know. You never know. And so, I think that the ambition that I displayed, I think the ambition that you displayed, the ambition that Stacey displayed, is refreshing because it's authentic, because it's transparent, and people are tired of the age-old gamesmanship that individuals play. But I do think it's a thin line between ambition and arrogance, and I try not to step on that line or straddle that line. And my significant other, like your significant other, keeps us in check with our ego.
That's absolutely right. And it's good to have that North Star.
Yes, definitely.
So, another thing you're very transparent about in the book, in a way that is really striking, is anxiety.
Yes.
Not a lot of, frankly, men in politics are expected to speak about anxiety, to speak about fear, to speak about crying. You're talking about everything from the weight of history to the effect of seeing somebody your age, a classmate who died. I remember a similar experience that, not somebody I knew well, but it just shook me and changed how I understood the world. The experience, the harrowing experience, and we're so thankful that you end the book with good news of first your wife coming very near to losing her life with complications from childbirth, and then also what your daughter went through. So first, I'm interested in why you decided to take that step and share that. And secondly, what if anything in the reaction to the way the book's been received maybe has struck you or shaped the way you think that either individually or as a matter of policy, we can shine a light on what it takes for all of us to confront the mental health challenges that everybody, whatever their life experience, shapes and shouldn't be so hesitant perhaps to talk about.
So the mental health aspect is something that was cathartic for me, being able to talk about anxiety, especially as a Black man, because many Black men do not talk about issues of mental health. We think the only person that we can talk to about our issues is our barber, which apparently, as you can see, I haven't been getting that therapy either. And so I wanted to break that stereotype. I wanted people to know that here I am. I have a beautiful family. I'm on CNN. I'm a lawyer. I'm trying to live my life in a way that can be an example for others. But yeah, I suffer with anxiety. I suffer with these what people deem to be irrational fears, but for me at the time when you're suffocating, they feel like very rational fears that you're dealing with. And I titled that chapter "Anxiety: a Black Man's Superpower," because for me that's what it is. Um, I use that fear to drive me, to make the most of every 24-hour period I have. And you mentioned it, going through these issues with my wife, almost dying in childbirth, my daughter Sadie being diagnosed with biliary atresia at 2 months old. Um, you know, on 93 days on the transplant waiting list. Every single day she was really small and skinny because her liver wasn't able to process nutrition. But she had this really big belly, and she was yellow. Um, and she was so sweet, but you could see literally every single day your daughter dying in front of you. And you talk about the overlay of all of these traumas. What I really wanted people to know, Pete, is my trauma may not be yours. I wanted to lay it out for people so that they can see the end game, they can see the perseverance. And although my trauma may not be yours, I want you to know that we can get through this together, especially during this time of coronavirus and uncertainty and the angst that goes along with it. For me, this book is really personal. And I also tell people that this book is really aspirational. I don't want people to think by any stretch that I'm perfect, because I even highlight many of my failures in this book. But it's a way that I believe that people can garner some understanding. And politically, um, especially around the issue of African American female mortality, it's an issue that's championed by Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Lucy McBath, Mama Adams, and others. Black women are 4 times more likely to die during childbirth than their white counterparts. And so I just wanted to be able to shine a light on that because um, my wife was extremely strong and she passed that strength down to my daughter. And although last year was the toughest year of my life, but I don't wish that upon anyone, having to almost lose your wife and almost lose your daughter over a sustained period of time. It's like avoiding a car crash every day for an entire year. And you know how your heart feels when you just miss that moment. And so uniquely enough, every day that my family's healthy now, we count it out all this joy. So even in quarantine, this doesn't affect us because we're like, everybody's healthy. This is a good day. We've been down that road. But I wanted to pour everything out. And I think that perversely enough, one of the things that Donald Trump has been characterized as doing is being like this authentic self. And people no longer, I think it's ascribing to a culture of anti-intellectualism. That's a whole nother story. But people now, that's the thing they want. And that is why I say that your reception was so good and Amy Klobuchar's reception was so good. And people are actually enjoying this book because there is a value added to being your authentic self. One of the things that I remember most about this campaign recently, going to this authenticity, is you and your husband on the front of Time magazine. And I utilized that image for me is in recent political history is probably, and I do these weird rankings in my head. Like I always say that Mitch Landrieu gave like the second best speech by a politician in like the last decade. It was really good. But that picture for me was right below when Barack Obama and Jacob Philadelphia were in the White House together, and Jacob Philadelphia asked Barack Obama, "Does your hair feel like mine?" And Barack leaned over, and this young 4-year-old black guy reached up and touched his hair. But the picture of you and your husband together on the front of Time, it was hopeful and aspirational and showed the true values of what this country could be, like that picture of Barack and a 4-year-old black kid. And that level of authenticity, that giving your all and just showing, your heart to the world is what I try to do in my Vanishing Country as well.
Well, you do me a great honor by putting that image in that company, because I know the picture you're talking about. It's extraordinary, and it was stirring to hear the way that you described it on the page too. Thanks for that. I know we've got some audience questions coming in too, so I don't want to hog things. Although speaking of rankings, just before I relinquish control to the moderator, there was one area where I thought you were less than fully forthcoming. I'd even go say there's a bit of obfuscation in the book. You discuss people discussing whether or not you are good at basketball, but the reader of the book doesn't actually get an objective view of whether you are in fact as good as you believe you are. So you want to clear that up once and for all?
I am an adult league all-star right now. I want you to know that I still have it. I'm actually in a text group with a few of my friends who were mentioned in the book. They're now reading it. No one really read it that was close to me, so this is new for a lot. My mom hasn't read it, but she didn't read it before it was released. My dad didn't read it, my sister nor brother. And so I was joking with my sister and brother. I said, this is going to be a weird Thanksgiving. And they said, if you get invited to Thanksgiving. So, no, I'm a decent basketball player, but I'm better in my head than I am with my ability.
So the first question is, do only young people have the burning desire to meet people where they are? Is it a lack of fear?
Let's both answer these. I would say that this is a trait that's more prevalent in young people. Thank you for your question, Christy, and thank you for coming. That means a lot to me personally. So first, let me start there. But I do think it is a trait that a lot of young people have. We do have this sense of invincibility. We do have this sense that we can change the world. I think Generation Z, which is a god-awful name for a generation, by the way. If you're out there in your Generation Z, please, let's have a meeting on how we find you a better name. What happens after Z? It just sounds like the end of the world. But like a year ago, we were concerned about this generation eating Tide Pods. And now it's the generation that is leading the charge on changing our gun laws throughout the country. And so it's a fascinating generation. And I always say that every ounce of change we've had in this country, from the civil rights movement to the women's rights movement to the gay rights movement, has been led by young people. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we still believe in words like hope and love and truth and justice and peace. And we are willing to meet people where they are. And so that is my 2 cents on that. Very good question, Christy.
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I picture some of those doors that you were knocking on. And I think part of that is courage. But I imagine part of that is also that quality that sometimes it's good not to know what you don't know, right? And to have that sense of, if not invincibility, that sense of sinking your teeth into things that maybe is not unique to young people, but is so often there for young people who step into the arena. And you're right. I mean, the generation that are, it pains me even now to admit that I don't belong to the same generation as college students today. But knowing that's true, you see the energy. And to me, the thing that really strikes me is that the activism is driven not by idealism, but by reality, right? Young people who are sick of seeing their generation, young people facing school violence like it's routine. Young people who know that the longer you're planning to be on this earth, the more you're going to have to deal with the consequences of climate and decisions that are being made right now about climate change. And it's always been young people. If you think back to the activist generation of the civil rights era, and then after that really moving and haunting visit to the site of the Orangeburg massacre, I had a chance to spend some time with the students at SCSU. Matter of fact, we went to the bowling alley that they now have on campus, and thankfully bowled a respectable few frames. But more importantly, got just a dose of inspiration from the level of energy and intelligence and motivation that those young people had.
The next question, besides voting, what can citizens do to advance the narrative of public health and health disparities as we define our new normal?
Sure. I think that first of all, I think that we're getting a false choice from many of our leaders now between whether or not we can err on the side of public health or err on the side of having a thriving economy. In fact, I think that having a good public health strategy is actually good for our economy. And I think that some of the polling we've seen recently about reopening and such is vital. I think one of the things that I write about in my Vanishing Country, and it's something that Pete in your Douglas plan, begin to unpack, is that it's peeling the with data. It's very important. With data, it is peeling the Band-Aid off the systemic racism and injustice we have in this country. I got into a very public spat with Jerome Adams, who's our United States Surgeon General, after his comments about do it for me, Ma, do it for Papa or your abuela. And basically telling Black folk to pull their pants up, stop drinking and stop smoking, when it didn't take into account when you're talking about public health, you have to look at the fact that, take my community, for example. You live in a food desert where you don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Due to the lack of Medicaid expansion, your hospitals closed down, so you have a lack of access to quality care. We haven't spent money on infrastructure. Every time we have infrastructure week in this country, it's like a joke on Jay Leno, because we know that it's not the truth. And I said Jay Leno, that doesn't even exist anymore. The Colbert
Dating our generation again.
Yeah, no, I just dated myself.
Look it up, kids.
Look it up. It was funny. He was hilarious. And so, living next to brownfields, these implicit biases in the way that people of color are treated through their healthcare delivery system. And so we have to look at all of these things in totality. That's why Alabama has the highest death rate in the union. That's why Black folk in New York and Detroit and Milwaukee, Atlanta, et cetera, are dying at higher rates. And so I think having a good political strategy that addresses a lot of these systemic injustices is actually good for our economy and can help change our new normal into something that's more fair for us all.
Hard to say it better than that, but I do want to point to one thing that I think is important. So across these systemic issues of racial injustice that have been, as Reverend Barber puts it, both exposed and exploited by this virus, right? Not only does it show the disparities, but also these weaknesses, the disempowerment of workers and the lack of access to healthcare, the fact that people don't have sick days or labor protections help the virus to spread to people of all races, working through these discriminatory patterns. It's a weakness in our country that we can't go back to. But I also want to mention that this ties back to a lot of unglamorous issue areas, right? So one thing that in my book, a lot of people, some people would respond to the love story, which was kind of my favorite part to write about. Some people love Notre Dame. They were excited to hear about Notre Dame. Some people were connected to Indiana. There's this tiny fraction, I'm going to say 0.5% of readers who just love the discussion of wastewater systems, right? A good example of something that mayors love and not a lot of other people. So I was delighted in your book, you talk about an internship with the mayor of Atlanta. You said she never chose sexy issues. For instance, she passionately worked on repairing the water system in the city, which might not be sexy, but directly affected everyone. And a lot of times, these issues that cash out at a local level, at a state level, when we're talking about water infrastructure, for example, are also issues of racial justice, right?
Right.
Being interested in water might have seemed like a quirky, nerdy pursuit, suitable only for people who are interested in engineering, until things like Flint happened. And as you described, there are a lot of, in particular, rural Black residents in places like South Carolina who've been living with Flint-like conditions for years or for decades. And so something has to happen to connect the dots between these very in-our-face issues of everyday life, whether it's access to clean, safe drinking water or access to more than a convenience store and some kind of access to fresh fruits and vegetables that connects through to a line to whether somebody's more likely to have hypertension and diabetes as Black families are. Not because they chose to, but because of these conditions. Then you can draw a direct line to the fact that not only are we talking about Black and brown folks more likely to work under conditions that make them more likely to catch COVID-19, but also more likely for it to be lethal once they do. And you discussed the closure of rural hospitals and what that means, what that might have meant tragically for your own family if your wife hadn't been able to access a hospital that she was during childbirth. So all of these things connect together, and it is systemic, and it's simply neither possible nor desirable to go back to where we were before, because that's how we came to this point.
Yes.
Thank you. So, Bakari, your dad's generational trauma and difficulty getting a job as an ex-felon former activist parallels a lot of St. Louisans who were part of the Ferguson uprising. How do we do a better job of creating career ladders and off-ramps for activists like your dad today?
So I think that's a challenge. It was a challenge then, it's a challenge now. activism is still something that's profoundly messy and still frowned upon because it shakes our cultural norms, right? What did King call rioting? It's the voice of the unheard, right? It's when that voice it reaches that palpable sense that it lets out in that fashion. And so that level of activism is still frowned upon in this country. I mean, we can look at anyone from, Kaepernick on down to my friends in Philip Agnew and all of my friends in Black Lives Matter and the Ferguson protesters. But what I can also say is that activism, that being a part of something larger than yourself, when history is written and when we look back at your activism, although it wasn't many of you all, the few that actually decided to give of themselves and stand on the front lines in that quest for freedom, in that quest for equality and justice and peace, will always be remembered kindly. In the meantime, in order to be an activist, you have a certain skill set. You need to make sure that you hone that skill set and understand what it is. If you're an activist, 9 times out of 10, you are a decent communicator and a decent organizer. And so you can utilize those skill sets of organizing and those skill sets of communicating to propel you into whatever career choice you may have. I tell a story that not many people know about Samuel L. Jackson in the book. Samuel L. Jackson was a true activist. Samuel L. Jackson actually got suspended from Morehouse College for a year for holding the Board of Trustees hostage. One of the members of the Board of Trustees was none other than Martin Luther King Sr. So as you see that trajectory, utilizing that activism, and then go to places that accept your fervent desire to be a part of change. A lot of that means that there are a lot of college campuses, a lot of HBCUs in particular, that are rooted in that culture of activism. And so if you're a young person who's on the front lines, go to some place that can foster those skill sets, and go to a place that can propel you to be in a line with other activists. You'll be surprised how many people are sitting in C-suites right now who set in and protested in back in their day as well.
I just want to mention that this transition kind of into legitimacy that activists get sometimes far too long after their time is something that has happened even in recent memory. Another, I think, powerful thing that you mentioned, that you just mentioned it in passing, but it's so striking. Well, I'll just read it. You're talking about Dr. King. You say people want to hold him up as a cotton candy political figure.
Yes.
They've managed to strip him, you write, of his revolutionary identity. I will always view Martin Luther King Jr., you say, as a militant Negro who had a 37% approval rating and who was taken from us because of hate. And, now there are holidays, there are statues, there's boulevards, right? I think here in South Bend, actually, one of the things we did was we put up a statue of a moment when the legendary president of the University of Notre Dame and Dr. King there's a famous photograph of them arm in arm at Soldier Field when Father Ted decided to participate in this event. Notre Dame's very proud of that now, but that was not the most popular decision that he made at the time, right? He had to answer for that. And the very things that are now kind of sanctified in a way were incredibly politically controversial and dangerous. And so I suppose we could look on the bright side and view that there really is a pathway toward seeing what is radical in one moment is legitimate in another, but also a warning sign that moral clarity doesn't mean that you'll be accepted in your time.
Let me just chime in real quickly. Dr. King, at his death, he didn't have April 4th of 68. They didn't do a Gallup approval rating of him in 68. The last one they did was in 66. And what they realized is that his approval rating hovered around the low 30s. I want people to juxtapose that against the fact that this president of the United States stays between 42 and 48%. And so Donald Trump's approval rating is consistently stronger than Martin Luther King Jr.'s at the time of his death, just as to put a pinpoint on the irony of how history will look kindly upon those who stand up for justice, no matter the consequence, and may not look as kindly on others.
Hi, my name is Liv Hand. I'm 17. I live here in the Midwest in St. Louis, Missouri. I was wondering, for Mayor Pete, Do you have any advice on how queer teens in the Midwest can advocate for themselves, especially in regards to the LGBTQ community?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you're doing it by speaking to these issues and being right up front about it. Look, I think sometimes in this country there's still a struggle around an awareness of how different it is depending where you are to be out or questioning or anything that's not mainstream, any part of the LGBTQIA plus community. It means one thing in one geography and another thing in another. And the struggle for equality did not end when marriage equality came to this country in 2015. So the first thing I would say is representation, being ready to be out and to step forward, whether it's running for political office or just in the halls of a school or in a community role. It's amazing how much changes when there's just that first awareness, that first person like you that you see somewhere in a position of responsibility or visibility. When I was in high school, I knew exactly 0 out students. And it's not because there weren't, it's not that I was the only gay kid there. It's just, nobody was willing to, everybody's kind of looking to their right and looking to their left. And if even one student, I think, had been out, I wonder how that would have changed my awareness and my ability to go on that journey of coming to terms with who I was, let alone having candidates and officials in office who let others know that they can see themselves there. So yes, it's a matter of activism. Yes, it's a matter of policy, but sometimes it's also just a matter of presence, letting somebody see that you know who you are. You never know who that's going to empower, who you won't even realize is watching you and taking a cue from you. And I think that's going to matter as much as the very real and very important work we have to do on everything from confronting the epidemic of violence against Black trans women to dealing with the health issues and health equity issues that are affecting so many LGBT community, and in particular, those who live at the intersection of different patterns of exclusion over gender identity, sexuality, race, and economics.
Let me ask you a question real quick, Pete. I know we're taking questions, but I want to ask a question. You know, it's I want to know about carrying the burden, I guess. That may not be the right word, but there was such a sense of pride within the LGBTQ community when you ran and when you won and cheering you on. But did you feel a sense of pressure? Did you feel a burden? A sense of responsibility to go out every single day and be representative of a community that had been oppressed throughout the South, especially where you're campaigning throughout certain parts of the Midwest. You know, it's still that very stagnant political thought, lack of progressive ideals and ideology. Did you feel a sense of pressure and responsibility having to represent for the first time on the main stage, the LGBTQ community, and stand up strong every single day you went outside speaking for this community?
Yeah, there's no question that you feel that and you're aware of that responsibility and you're humbled by it, right? First of all, knowing that there's such diversity within the LGBTQ community and trying to find a way to make sure that people whose experience might be very different from mine still see themselves reflected in what we were doing. Balancing that with the fact that I wasn't running to be president, of course, only of gay America, but of the United States of America. And so finding a way to live into who you are, to be very clear about it, and at the same time not allow it to define you. People outside of the community would want to put you in a certain box, and sometimes people inside of the community who I think sometimes grow up on a certain definition of a right or wrong way to be queer. Are also looking at you. But the thing that was the most powerful to me was when somebody would let me know that the fact of our campaign made it easier for them to have a conversation with their parents about coming out, or a conversation with a friend or a loved one. Sometimes it was not unusual when I was traveling for somebody to come up to me, especially actually people from an older generation who just never dreamed that this was even going to be possible. And just with eye contact, not even be able to speak, just come up to me, shake my hand, and just in eye contact would be able to have an entire sort of conversation about what this all meant for them. And I knew that that created a responsibility to try every step of the way to reflect well on others in my community who are looking, whether or not their politics lined up perfectly with mine or not.
Yeah.
That I had that responsibility and tried to wear it well.
Well, you wore it with great dignity and respect, and so that question I've always wanted to ask, because we in my discussions with 44 often, it was a question of blackness. How are you supposed to be black? It was a question of, are you going to be president for Black America? Which sort of suppose like Tavis Smiley and Cornel West, wanted more from him in that, and he would articulate the same thing. I'm not running to be president of Black America. I'm running to be president of the United States of America. And so it's fascinating, those parallels. After you become Secretary of State and you recap your presidential election, I think that's going to be a hell of a book to write.
So we're going to take another question, another video question.
Hi, my name is Gayatri and I'm from Edison, New Jersey. My question to Bakari and Pete is, how can people have uncomfortable conversations about race and privilege? And with these conversations, how can people acknowledge the humanity of others without letting hate and anger get in the way?
Yeah. Oh man, that was a powerful question. So, I think that when Black folk and people of color read this book, My Vanishing Country, they're going to get a sense of pride. And what I want is when white folk read this book to get a sense of understanding. I think that understanding of other struggles, understanding where people come from, allows for us to have very difficult conversations around the issue of race, but have those conversations with a sense of compassion, with a sense of empathy, and also giving people the benefit of their humanity. My greatest fear is that, raising Black children in this country, there is a large segment of the population that do not give them the benefit of their humanity. Not only did this book come out during a pandemic where we're talking about the coronavirus and racial disparities, but we're also talking about Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. Ahmaud Arbery got murdered in a good old-fashioned South Georgia father-son lynching because they saw him as being less than human. And so whether or not you're talking about Michael Brown, whether or not you're talking about Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Alton Sterling, Walter Scott, Keith Lamont Scott, I mean, the list goes on and on and on, even Clemente Pinckney, and the 8 others who were killed in the Charleston massacre. It's a question about seeing other people's humanity. And so I wrote this book because I wanted to spark conversations and hopefully understanding. I was with Bishop T.D. Jakes earlier this week, and he would say, you can teach people arithmetic, and you can teach people science, and you can teach people about ancient Egypt and Rome, but you can't teach people Blackness per se. And so this is an amazing opportunity to learn and understand. That way we are prepared to have these difficult conversations, which are necessary and I believe to be healthy.
What a great answer. All I can add to that is that I think the only way to have these conversations is out loud and in good faith. And they will be uncomfortable because the search for understanding, especially when it's in good faith, involves a lot of stumbling and trying to understand how to see through somebody else's eyes without presuming to know those things that can be only known through experience. But I believe that's why stories are so powerful. It's why your story, Bakari, is powerful. It's why literature and film are powerful, because they allow us to see or to peer a little bit into what we don't know based on what we do. If I don't know what it's like to walk into a place like the South Carolina State Legislature as a young Black Democrat for the first day, but you describe what it's like, and as somebody who knows what it's like to walk into a room and be uneasy, it gives that little thread of connection. Everyone knows what it's like to be a human being. And when you read about what it's like to go through the experience your family went through medically, for somebody, my experience couldn't be more different than that of a Black woman in childbirth facing health disparities. And I'll never understand that. But I can imagine what it's like to be afraid, and I know what it's like to be grieving, and I know what it's like to encounter something that's outside of your control. And so we take those pieces of what we might understand just because we are people, and connect those up to the things that we'll never quite understand through the eyes of those who lived it. And if we have that kind of listening ear, and if people have the courage to share their stories and sometimes grab you by the collar and shake you a little bit, as many people did, metaphorically speaking, of course, when I was a candidate, and shake my understanding of what I knew and what I didn't through the lens of their experience. That's the only way that I think we'll get to where we can, because the one thing we all have in common is we all know what it's like to be a person. And off of that, we can build into the things that we don't. But Gayatri, I think your question is the question of our time.
Yes.
Because we've got to find ways to do this before it's too late. I think the future of the American project depends on it. And, in particular, the experience you described, anchored in this historical massacre, the Orangeburg massacre, only to be echoed in so many horrifying ways by what happened to Mother Emanuel, I think reminds us that there is every reason to doubt the future of the American project, and every reason to fight for it.
Correct.
In the name of that kind of justice.
I mean, that's my challenge. That's what I tell people in my Vanishing Country. I love this country so much. I love the promise that it is supposed to put on display for all of its children. And I'm going to push to ensure that everyone, no matter who they love, no matter what they look like or who they pray to, has access to that American dream. Because I don't want this country to vanish, or those ideals to vanish any longer. Although you can't help but to believe in this country and the political climate that we're in now, that a lot of these ideals are fleeting. It's our job to continue to challenge ourselves to believe in what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. And I think that's the only way that we'll be able to come together and answer her question, to answer her question directly. I hope we can come together with understanding, compassion, empathy, humanity, and that's the only way that we can actually heal, which is what our country needs.
So I think we have time for one more question. There are so many questions that the audience has asked, but I think that we should. So I'm going to ask, it's a toss-up between two. Bakari, what is your proudest accomplishment when serving in the state legislature?
So outside of the state legislature was endorsing Barack Obama. Is an accomplishment because my two choices were Barack Obama and John Edwards. And I have to say, thank God I chose the right person. And inside the state legislature, this isn't a sexy thing, but I built a library. I'm from a very poor rural community, and that library is a beacon of hope for so many people. And so that's what I'll count as my biggest accomplishment. It's not the sexiest thing, but it's a place where people can go and read. It's a place where people can go and do resumes, get Wi-Fi and internet, community programs, etc. And it was something that I was very proud to accomplish.
I want to thank both of you for being here. Left Bank Books, thanks you so much. You are very inspiring to me personally and to a lot of our viewers. So thank you both so much for being here tonight.
Before we close, thank you, Pete, so very much for joining me on this journey. And if you have an opportunity to visit Left Bank Books, please do. Pete's much better half has a better book than both myself and Nick. So please give it a chance as well. It's another Buttigieg with an even better project coming out soon. So I wanted to give him a shout out too.
Thanks for that. Thanks for the kind word. Great to be with Left Bank Books and Bakari. So pleased to be virtually reunited this way. Congratulations again on a great read and a great story.
Thank you.